Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let me begin by thanking you on behalf of the state of California and the district attorney's office for serving on this jury. I realize that it's been a personal sacrifice, and certainly a sacrifice on the part of your employers, as well as on part of your families, and we do appreciate it greatly. As you recall, we are here today to prove that the charges for first-degree murder against the defendant, Mr. Verplank, are in fact true. Now that you have sat through the proceedings and have heard the evidence, I'm going to indicate to you what the counsel's theory is and has been from the very start. Before that, however, one thing I think you need to understand is that this defendant stands before you accused of first-degree murder. Under the laws of the state of California and the laws of jurisdiction throughout this nation, we recognize the concept and have long recognized that through the history of this world that it's unlawful to take the life of another human being. Now, the state of California has charged this defendant with the unlawful taking of the life of Julia Niemeyer as a premeditated and willful crime. As I've indicated, we've had an opportunity for the past few weeks for you to hear the evidence in support of the state's position as to why we believe the facts demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that this defendant did indeed commit these crimes. Before we talk about the crimes themselves and the specific conduct leading up to that, I think we need to discuss the past history with the defendant and the witnesses and the underlying themes that are presented within these relationships. As you recall, early in the proceedings, we produced witnesses who talked about their past history with the defendant, specifically noting Ms. Kathleen McCarthy, who has testified to her past relationship with the defendant as beginning nearly 10 years ago in high school. All of the witnesses brought to the stand have testified, in one way or another, that the defendant had evolved into a bitter, demented, and dangerously obsessive man following their years in high school. By evaluating the evidence left behind at the murder scene, I think we have all clearly found this to be true. To reiterate, although I'm certain the evidence presented have left a withstanding impression upon everyone, we examined the partial bloody fingerprints that were left in the feminist poetry book in the victim's Los Angeles home. And although they could not be matched, the resemblance of the defendant's prints were clear. Next, the message splayed in blood across the wall and the crime scene stating, "I'm not Kathy's clown," has undoubtedly revealed imperative information regarding the case. When evaluating this evidence, we can draw one of two conclusions. Either both of these clues have an uncanny, highly coincidental relationship with the defendant, victim, and her friends, or simply that the defendant's trapped emotions involving these people erupted in a poetic, yet very cruel manner. The messages left behind at the crime scene can only attest to the defendant's absolute disregard for basic humanity and rational thinking. The grotesque scene of the crime, including the hanging and gutted body of the victim, has left a disturbing and lasting impression upon all of you, I'm sure. And not to take away from the catastrophic crime and pain the family of the victim must be experiencing, but the blatant arrogance of the defendant stands to speak volumes as well. The smug clues left behind demonstrate the demeanor of the defendant and clearly portray the flurry of rage the defendant entered, making his crime extremely transparent. Who knows? The defendant may have gone untraced if it weren't for the obsessive rage that induced these deliberate messages left behind. Now, the defendant has been caught like a monkey with his fist in a bottle. All he had to do was let go of the goodies, but he couldn't. Why? Not because he was entrapped, but because he was greedy and taken in by his past emotions. The obsessively twisted motives behind the defendant's crimes are not easy to explain in terms that we, as morally upstanding citizens, can understand. However, that is not our only task here today. We are here to prove, beyond reasonable doubt, that the defendant has savagely taken the life of an innocent woman, regardless of what his motives may have been. With the defendant has left behind, we can draw clear inferences as to what he wanted to accomplish. Mr. Verplank acted as a child would when they are deprived of what they want. Whether it was being outcast by his peers or being teased like many children are, the past is irrelevant. The defendant took matters of retaliation into his own hands and acted in a manner that has left the friends and family of the victim shattered. Now, once they have been caught red-handed, still deny the allegations brought before the court. The situation reminds me of a past experience of mine when my 6-year-old niece was caught drawing on the wall with a red marker. The pieces of evidence lay directly in front of us, and with red ink on her hands, she still denied the charges. I trust that you all will see beyond the defendant's clean record in our judicial system and realize that even the innocent face of a 6-year-old child does not make the evidence disappear, just as the evidence from this murder will not.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, throughout the case there has been one common theme. There simply is not enough evidence to convict Mr. Theodore Verplank of first-degree murder. The prosecution has not been able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the murder of Miss Julia Niemeyer was committed by Mr. Verplank and was willful and premeditated. It is important for you to remember that, as the coroner testified, that Miss Niemeyer's cause of death was a massive heroin overdose. There is no way to prove that Mr. Verplank, in fact, was linked to her death. As Julia Niemeyer's uncle testified, she was not in a stable condition. Although she was nowhere near being a heroin addict, the fact that she was emotionally unstable cannot be discounted as the reason for her heroin overdose. Although I would like to remind you that Miss Niemeyer's parents were killed in a car accident about 6 years ago. She lived off of the trust fund her parents left her and was unemployed at the age of 29. She had advertised herself in sex tabloids, and her uncle described her as very quiet and as a girl who did not let people get close to her. As the coroner testified, Julia Niemeyer's cause of death was an overdose of heroin, not because she was brutally mutilated. As the officer who works in the same precinct as the Aloha Regency testified, Miss Niemeyer did not live in the safest of neighborhoods. Her residence was home to illegal aliens, welfare recipients, alcoholics, and addicts. As the officer testified, he would not discount the fact that someone in this neighborhood may have found her dead body shortly after the overdose and mutilated it because similar situations have occurred. The prosecution argued that the overdose and mutilation were committed by the same person, but this cannot be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution's case has relied heavily on the 2 partial fingerprints that were found on the poetry book in Miss Niemeyer's home. I want you to ask yourself if it is just to convict an innocent man of murder based on a fraction of a fingerprint. Also, I want to remind you that Mr. Verplank is on trial for first-degree murder. Fingerprints at the scene of the crime do not prove that the murder was willful and premeditated. The prosecution argued that Mr. Verplank was guilty of the crime because "I am not Kathy's clown" was written on the wall of Miss Julia Niemeyer's home. There is no way to prove that this, in fact, links Mr. Theodore Verplank to the death of Julia Niemeyer, nor does it present a motive. You cannot convict a man of murder in good conscience based on a mere coincidence. Mr. Theodore Verplank would not commit murder. As I have shown, he did not have a motive to murder Miss Niemeyer. He is an upstanding citizen who has never been convicted of a crime before in his life, nor has he ever been in trouble with the law for something even as minor as a parking ticket. He owns a lucrative photography business and is the epitome of a law-abiding citizen. As I previously stated, Mr. Verplank is being accused of murder in the first degree. The prosecution has not been able to prove that he has murdered Miss Julia Niemeyer or that the murder was premeditated and willful. When something as devastating as what happened to Miss Julia Niemeyer, it is only natural to want to place the blame on someone quickly. But just because what happened to her was unjust does not mean that it is just to convict an innocent man such as Mr. Verplank. In all actuality, this case is really about the Los Angeles Police Department trying to make up for their past shortcomings. The truth of the matter is that there have been 30 unsolved homicides in the past couple decades. The state is just looking for someone to blame for Miss Niemeyer's tragic death, even if that person is innocent, just as Mr. Theodore Verplank is.